last time I think we met, you were in Friends of Raila.
Yes, please.
Tell us a bit about that and how you now come to your present role.
Well, first of all, I'll give you a bit background about myself. I've come from the private sector. I'm a management consultant by profession, specializing in strategy development and implementation. Now, I got into the political process through the Friends of Raila lobby group, as you correctly put it. We came together as like-minded friends, and at that point in time, we felt that we needed to think a bit outside the box as far as the catchment area of the Raila Odinga support base was concerned. We felt that it was imperative to reach out to people who were not necessarily members of ODM as a party, but who could even equally belonging to other parties, but would support Raila Odinga's presidential candidature. Okay. So that is why we came up with the concept of friends, that they could come in and interface with the Prime Minister at that level, come in as friends of the candidate. Well, Fora was built around ideals, and I believe those within Fora still aspire to those ideals. The fact that certain people like myself, like Gitobu or Hassan Omar is venturing into politics, does not mean that the ideals on the basis of which Fora was built are not holding water at the moment. That entity, organization, was not built around individuals, but it was built on the premise of a strong foundation of ideals and aspirations that members of Fora as a political formation wanted to pursue. And that still is very much existent in Fora.
Okay. All right, let's get down to business now.
Yes.
Let's talk about the flag bearer, the presidential flag bearer of CORD.
Yes.
In the beginning, when the CORD alliance was formed, I think perhaps not, because they say in politics there are no permanent friends or enemies. But I think it might have taken some people by surprise that Raila and Kalonzo, who had been political enemies, as it were, for the past 5 years, now decided to come together. What brought on that coming together? And, you know, everybody's asking, so will they be enemies again? What happens now? So tell us about the decision for the two of them to come together and how that came to be.
I must categorically state that Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka have never differed on the need to facilitate reforms and real change in this country. There have been some slight differences on the approach, but they have never differed on the integral need to facilitate real change in this country, so that we have got an enabling environment through which Kenyans can exploit their full potential.
But some of the disagreements that we saw, who would lead government business, who would speak first, some of them deteriorated to a rather nasty level. So they agreed basically in principle, but not on who would be head of government business and who would speak before the other, who was more important in the coalition government than the other?
Well, you know, the coalition government to begin with was a unique situation. Kenyans were not prepared for it. And when you introduce radical changes in the way government operates, or the way government, the formation setup of government, there is bound to be some resistances. So basically, as people try to get their level, you are bound to see some slight misunderstandings here and there. But I think they settle down very quickly. We need to start by looking at the situation that led to the formation of that government. Kenya was then at crossroads.
That's right. And Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka was very instrumental in, some would say, denying Raila Odinga the presidency by working together with President Kibaki now. Is there any form of animosity?
There is no animosity at all between Raila and Kalonzo. Circumstances as at 2007 are fairly different from circumstances at this point in time. There are a lot of factors in the operational environment which have changed. But the beauty of all this is that the issues which bring Raila and Kalonzo together are far much more than those issues that led to their going separate ways as at 2007. So I really don't think that this is the time for us to focus on the past. We need to move forward as a country, and the fact that the two of them have come together in this political formation called the CORD coalition, to me is a very positive step, not just towards the enhancement of the democratization process of this country, but also laying a foundation for building peace and unity
Okay.
So that we move forward as one country.
Right. CORD has been very forthright in the reform agenda, saying they're the reformists and they're the ones who will implement the constitution. Some detractors would say, well, that process is already going on, and this is not a time for reform and we're being stuck in the past. Tell us why this is a very important strategy for CORD.
It is a fundamental issue. And from where I sit, I see it as the real issue that will define the direction that this elections is going to take. You cannot talk about we have a constitution in place, now we don't need to be talking about the constitution. No, we had a constitution at the point of independence in 1993, but we saw that constitution being systematically adulterated at the whims of those in power and to satisfy the interest of a few individuals who are in power. So we do not have the guarantee. If we vote in a wrong team of political leaders, we do not have the guarantee that the same constitution that Kenyans fought so hard for will not face the same systematic adulteration that we have witnessed in the past. So we need a committed team of political leaders who will ensure successful implementation of the new constitutional dispensation. If you ask me, most of the ills that we have witnessed in this country have been as a result of bad governance arising from a wrong constitution in place. So we need a constitution that will not just ensure that there are checks and balances, but will also guarantee that the three arms of government, namely the executive on one hand and the legislature and the judiciary on the other, are operating independent of each other, independently but also complementing the efforts of each other.
Let's talk about the adulteration of the new constitution. Like you've mentioned, we've seen certain chapters of that, chapter 6 being one very important one. ODM has some good numbers in parliament. How is it that ODM MPs allowed certain adulterations to pass through? Because this is what we see happening. Things happen in parliament, laws are passed, and then we have people coming outside of parliament and saying, look, that is not fair, that is not right. Case in point, being the recent awarding of hefty perks. And we had the Prime Minister coming out and saying it's not fair, when many people will say Prime Minister and ODM and the partner parties in CORD now knew this was going to happen. Were they not able to marshal their numbers and go into Parliament and say, we're not going to pass this?
I think we need to learn from this experience. The fundamental lesson that we have learned from the current Parliament is that you need to marshal enough members to enable you push through your agenda in Parliament.
ODM has good numbers in Parliament, and together now with Wiper Democratic, because some of these things were passed after the CORD had been formed. Was it not possible for the Prime Minister to say, look, ODM, come here, Wiper Democratic Movement in New Ford, Kenya, let's see what we can do to make sure this doesn't pass, because they are members of Parliament too.
That's true, but Raila is not directly in charge of the legislative agenda in Parliament. The MPs,
but he can marshal the MPs.
I agree
say,
with you.
You know,
I agree with you that he can do that.
Right.
But that is actually the work of the chief whips. So
who is Jacoyo Midio?
Who is Jacoyo Midio? And also we have, of course, Mudama on the other side. But again, as much as Raila can influence the thinking of MPs in Parliament, you need to understand Raila's way of operation. He wants people to be guided by their conscience. So he's not the type of leader who will lord it over others. So if there have been certain ills, certain misdeeds that we have witnessed within the Parliament, that responsibility should be owned by members of Parliament in their individual capacities.
But are they not members of the
leaders.
party?
They are members of the party.
Does the party not have a manifesto that says, as a party, our members of Parliament will adhere to this, and this is what we think is unfair? I understand what you're saying about him, not thumbing down his opinion to everybody, but does he have control over his members of Parliament and say, this is unacceptable, as ODM party, this is what we're saying, and we're asking our MPs to go into Parliament and vote against certain issues like the hefty perks?
That is true, but you need also to understand the circumstances within which we have been operating since the formation of the coalition government. It is true that these members of Parliament joined Parliament on parties, but we have had a lot of movement, shifts and alliances within Parliament. So by and large, if you look at the Hansard and the way the MPs voted, ODM MPs largely voted against those packs. But again, the scales were tilted in favor of the opposite side, considering that fact that quite a number of MPs who are on the ODM side have now shifted political alliances. Okay. They are in ODM, yes, but practically they have already moved out of ODM.
Right.
So that is the reality of the situation on the ground as at now, and that is why I cannot wait for these elections to be held,
okay,
so that we can have some sanity.
Right. The position of the Quad Alliance and the Raila presidency on certain key matters in the country, like security, being Prime Minister of the country for the last 5 years, and of course, like you say, he came in under special circumstances, but what happens going forward when it comes to matters security? What would we expect on that? We've seen what's happening in Tana Delta, we've seen Baragoi, we've seen alleged fake policemen within the service. What do we expect from a Raila presidency?
First of all, before I talk about Raila, what we should expect from a Raila presidency, I think we need to briefly articulate what Raila has done while in government, his scorecard. You know the circumstances on the basis of which this coalition government was formed. But despite the challenges in the coalition government, the ODM side, and by extension Raila, has largely tried to implement the ODM manifesto, the promise that he gave Kenyans as at 2007. And I just want to pick on 3 key areas. The first one, enactment of the new constitutional dispensation. This was an integral promise to Kenyans by the time Raila was running for presidency last time. And having gotten into government, Raila ensured that he fast-tracked the enactment of the new constitutional dispensation. I will be coming to the benefits of that later when I talk about his promise to Kenyans. The next area is infrastructure. It was a key promise by Raila to Kenyans at the time of the last general elections. And the government, through the efforts of Raila and of course all the integral players, have largely introduced fundamental reforms as far as infrastructure is concerned. Right. But again, we need to recognize, for example, in the area of roads, most of the changes and policy and infrastructural reforms that we have witnessed in the road sector were formulated and conceptualized when Raila was the Minister for Roads. So these initiatives did not just start with the formation of the coalition government.
While we're on that, do you think it's unfair that a lot of this is attributed to President Kibaki?
And by extension, Raila, of course. There are core principles in this coalition government. So I don't think there is any integral achievement that you'll attribute to President Kibaki that will not be equally attributed to Raila, because they are core principles. So they take responsibility for the successes of this government. But having said that, there's one point I don't want to miss, that Raila, while serving as Minister for Roads, oversaw the conceptualization of the reforms in the road sector that we have witnessed today. This is what led to the Kenya National Highway Authority, Kenya Urban Roads Authority, Kenya Rural Roads Authority, and all is there for everybody to see. You have seen Thika Road, you have seen fundamental road projects coming up, not just within the city, but also in the environs, other urban centers, and also in the rural areas. So that is a fundamental achievement attributed to Raila. 2, some of the key reforms that we are witnessing today in the energy sector were conceptualized when Raila was Minister for Energy.
Such as?
For example, the fundamental changes that have led to the formation of the rural roads, the Rural Electricity Authority, REA, Rural Electrification Authority, the separation of the functional domains between Kenya Power and Lighting Company and Kenya Electricity Transmission Company. These are fundamental policy initiatives that were undertaken when Raila was Minister for Energy. So in the area of infrastructure, Raila has done fairly well, and that is one of the integral scorecards he has while in government. I'll then move to the area of environment. While operating in a very hostile operational environment, Raila took a lot of risks to ensure that we restore some of the fundamental water catchment towers in this country. Even the climate change unit is operationalized, domiciled in the office of the Prime Minister. Now, we need to take stock of the initiatives that the government has undertaken with regards to the environment through Raila's efforts. That is, and again, an integral scorecard.
Okay.
But now moving
Let's
forward.
Move forward, yes.
1, jobs is going to be a key issue. A Raila-led government would ensure that there's an enabling environment for business enterprises, the private sector, foreign investment to prosper. so that we have escalation of the number of jobs
right.
in this country.
Okay, that sounds a little abstract sometimes when we hear it is an enabling environment for business.
I want to
that
go to
will create
specifics.
jobs. Let's go into specifics, and let's recall a promise that was made about 100,000 jobs, if you recall,
yes.
In 2002.
Yeah.
That wasn't realized.
I want to go to specifics of how this is going to be achieved.
Okay,
one, there will be tax incentives to the private sector to spur economic growth, okay? So that we have a situation where there's impetus for the private sector to plow back the profits that they get from their business into further investment in this country so that we create more jobs. Two, Raila-led government will facilitate a free market economy. So where there is free entry and exit. One of the integral obstacles that we have had as far as economic growth in this country is concerned, and by extension creation of jobs, is certain bottlenecks in the market, where we don't have perfect market situations. This is what has led to monopolistic tendencies on one hand, and at times even duopolistic and oligopolistic market structures. So we will ensure, when Raila comes into government, that we have got a free market economy where there is freedom of exit, freedom of entry into the market, and there is fair play. And in line with this, a Raila-led government will ensure that the Competition Authority of Kenya, which is already in place, is strengthened so that any bottlenecks in the market are eliminated.
Okay. All right.
Then I want to move on as far as jobs are concerned. Access to credit. The Raila-led government will ensure that there is easy access credit for the private sector, and ensure also that the interest rates are at manageable levels. That again will spur economic growth and development.
Okay.
Then finally, I just want to also elaborate one point: tax, collection of tax. The framework for collecting taxes will be strengthened, but we will also ensure that the taxation levels is on a sliding scales, so that we do not interfere with negative leading to negative repercussion on the disposable income of those in the lower income.
Okay, let's just get into some of those in detail. We've talked a lot about enabling the private sector, which obviously would then provide jobs. But let's talk about some of the efforts for the youth that were under the Prime Minister's docket, like the Kazi kwa Vijana scheme, which was heavily criticized in the way that it was structured, saying that they were giving young people manual jobs. And we all know that didn't end too well. What was the problem with that, and why wasn't that managed as properly as it was, saying that young people can only do construction and manual labor, and not necessarily taking into account that a lot of young people are coming out with degrees, diplomas, certificate courses, and that they can do more professional jobs?
The Kazi kwa Vijana initiative was being implemented by line ministries. The functional mandate of the Office of the Prime Minister is an oversight role over the ministries. So it was not the Office of the Prime Minister that was implementing.
But it played an oversight role?
That's true, that's true. Just the same way that office plays an oversight role in the operations of all the other ministries. That is the functional domain of the Office of the Prime Minister. So I do not really think that any underperformance of a given line ministry must be attributed to the Office of the Prime Minister.
I'll put it to you this way, Eliud. I have several people above me whom I answer to, many who play an oversight role. However, everything I do is attributed to them. They are accountable for my actions here, for anything that happens here, and they cannot continue to say that it's Yvonne. There's somebody who has an oversight role. Now, having an oversight role over a particular ministry, and you notice that the Kazi kwa Vijana scheme is not being implemented as it should, what we would expect from the oversight body would be to come in and say, this is not being done right, let's change the systems, let's do this. Because if then you're saying that the Office of the Prime Minister would not be responsible, then why would it have an oversight role in the first place?
Let me put it this way. There could have been some weaknesses in the implementation framework for the Kazi kwa Vijana initiative. But as Kenyans, we need to view those as lessons learned that should inform the future.
That is right. Lessons learned, however, Eliud, but also lessons learned for the future, because the president's role is also oversight. is it not? He doesn't necessarily go into every ministry and say, do this. So if we're taking a look at the Prime Minister's office and we're saying, as an oversight role, well, there's lessons that need to be learned and we didn't do such a good job in managing that, then how will he, as a president, oversee ministries, oversee departments, oversee money that is going through, if with the Kazi kwa Vijana scheme, that didn't go so well?
Well, you need to understand the unique circumstances within which this coalition government have been operating. You may be having an oversight role on the implementation of certain projects, but you are also not in control of the past. For example, as much as we had one coalition government, the reality on the ground is that we had got a lot of alignment towards the two divides within the coalition government. For example, the treasury was being controlled by the PNU side of government. This situation is not just unique to the Kazi kwa Vijana initiative. We have also witnessed the same in the road sector and several other sectors, where certain viable projects are due for implementation, but the monies are not released in time. Not because the money is not there, but because people are playing politics. So these are some of the challenges that we are faced in this coalition government, and that is why we don't want a repeat of the same. We want the coalition to win these elections by a landslide in the first round, so that you have got a strong team of political players who can implement what they have promised Kenyans.
All right. Some would say these are all excuses.
Not
for
excuses.
Non-performance?
Not excuses for non-performance. I think Kenyans really should judge Raila on the basis of his track record. Not just from the time he got into government, but his role in the democratization process of this country. We need to look at Raila from the time he was a political activist, growing to become a member of parliament, becoming a party leader, at times sacrificing personal ambitions and working together with forces which were in government at that point in time, just as a means of stabilizing the political environment.
Okay.
We need to look at Raila from the time he became a presidential candidate. We need to look at Raila from the time he actually resigned from parliament as a member of parliament, based on fundamental differences in principle by the leadership of the sponsoring party.
Okay.
We need to look at Raila's contribution towards reforms, real change, and the fight for democracy.
Right, Eliud. Let's move to the future. National security is a matter of great importance.
I agree with you, is
right.
a matter of grave concern. You cannot even spur economic growth if you do not have the appropriate environment as far as security is concerned. So this is going to be one of the fundamental campaign agendas of the CORD coalition, and by extension promises that we are going to put on the table for Kenyans. Security, one, we will ensure that there is fundamental reforms within the police force. We want to see a stakeholder-friendly police force, but which is also well remunerated, so that we do not expect too much from the police force, while we are on the same side, on the flip side of it, not taking care of the welfare of the police
right.
force.
Reforms in the police service have already started. We
But
already have the wheels in
yes,
motion.
but it needs to be operationalized.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we would have a sort of operationalized, because all of this has already been worked on. We have an inspector general, of course, we're waiting for his deputies,
Yeah.
and everything. But you see, these are things that are already happening. And there's a lot of people that would say, okay, we're saying that we're implementing the new constitution, but a lot of those things are already happening. We're seeing the commissions already coming into place, whereby saying that the Raila presidency would be doing that, but it's already being done.
Now,
it's already happening.
we may be having the legal and regulatory framework in place, but all these initiatives need to be institutionalized. You cannot facilitate, if I may say, successful implementation of the new constitutional dispensation if you don't believe in it. Now, let me just outline some of the key areas I have in mind. One is devolution of power and resources. That will be a fundamental benefit of the new constitutional dispensation, so that we take resources to the grassroots. We also devolve structures of governance, so that for the first time in the history of this country, Kenyans can adequately participate in the decision-making processes. That is key. The next key issue is the Bill of Rights. The right to food, the right to shelter, and so on. That is a fundamental ingredient in this constitution. Then there's also the issue of integrity, leadership and integrity, chapter 6 of the constitution. These are just some of the, and then taking care of the integral interest of some of the sections of the Kenyan society which have hitherto been marginalized, like the youth and the women. There are integral benefits that will arise from this constitution to some of these groups. But having said that, you need a team of political players who truly believe in this constitution to facilitate its successful implementation. You cannot tell me that now we have the constitution in place, let us move on, yeah? Let us forget about how this constitution came into being.
Speaking of that team, and which is what you've mentioned when we're talking about Parliament and, excuse me, the fact that a lot of people had moved from ODM, so ODM is not exactly what it was. When people talk of that split of people like Musalia Mudavadi leaving, of William Ruto leaving, is that a reflection on the democracy or lack thereof within ODM, and how sure are we, Eliud, that going into the future, should he win in 2013, we will have another case of MPs leaving, the coalition losing its numbers and therefore its clout and therefore its ability to run the government?
You see, Kenyans are being hoodwinked that there are so many political alliances coming up, and that these alliances are issue-based. Let me put it this way. To me, I only see two political forces in the current prevailing political environment. That is the Code Alliance and the Jubilee Alliance. What is happening, these elections is basically going to be a replica of 2002. The same forces that work together as at 2002 are regrouping.
All right, but let's talk about what the lessons learned, like you keep saying, lessons learned within ODM to prevent what happened again, where you're bleeding out members who are complaining about what's happening in ODM, because it did incapacitate ODM, like you said, in terms of numbers in Parliament, in terms of saying these are the policies we're going to push forward. What changed within ODM after the exit of William Ruto, after the exit of Musalia Mudavadi and others? Because for sure, like you say, they've just now gone to the opposing alliances.
Yes.
Whether you believe it's a two-horse race or not, but how sure are we then that we will have schisms again and not one united coalition and all of this happening once again?
Okay, now let me put it this way. I would be worried, very worried, if those who are leaving ODM were leaving ODM on the basis of differences on issues, based on differences on the approach towards which the approach that we should take to satisfy the aspirations of Kenyans. But some of the shifts and alliances we have seen within the political domain are largely informed by personal interests.
But it did hamper your ability to be powerful in Parliament and therefore pass through laws, did it not?
It did, and that's why we don't want a repeat of this situation. We want a clear win this time around.
How will it be different?
It will definitely be different. We have put together a machine, a political machine that will ensure that CORD wins these elections in the first round by a landslide.
That's fine, but how does CORD stay together through the administration to 2017 is the question.
Now, it all boils down to one thing. Are we all united? Are the principles of the CORD coalition united in what the agenda that they want to achieve for Kenyans? It's not about positions. It's not about personal interests. You have seen Kalonzo Musyoka sacrificing his political ambitions, presidential ambitions for Raila Odinga. Okay? So it is not a question of political power play here. It's a question of, do we have an enabling, a framework in place to ensure that we are going to meet the goals and aspirations of Kenyans? That, to me, is what has brought these political players together. Okay. It's not about sharing of positions. It's not about power and influence.
Fine. All right. Let's move on to Raila Odinga. Will we see him declaring his wealth? Martha Karua has done it and thrown the challenge to her fellow contenders. Is this something that we will see him doing?
Oh, yes. I think it will not be too long from now before you see that.
Can you
because
give us a date?
Raila has nothing to hide. Look at his track record from the private sector.
Okay, I understand his track record, and then you keep saying that.
Yeah.
But my question is, when will we see him declare his wealth?
This will be done just before we do the presidential launch.
The presidential launch?
Yes, we are going to officially do the presidential launch.
When will that be?
Yeah.
I'd like a date so that we can make a commitment to our viewers.
At the end of this month, we are doing our presidential launch some date around the end of this month.
All right.
And all of these issues will come into the public domain. All
right. I'd like us to move quickly, and we will hold you to that. That has been said today, the 16th of January. Eliud Owalo said here, by the end of this month, we hope to see him. And I will give you a call. If we don't see him declaring his wealth for whatever reason. Let's move very quickly. He made the recent revelations about what happened in 2007, that he decided to, not form a parallel government, as it were, not be sworn in. Some would say, why now? Why 5 years later would he choose to reveal this? Is this a campaign strategy?
It's not a campaign strategy. You see, we need at times to take stock of where we have come from. That was a very, very delicate situation in the history of this country. And any small mistake would have led actually to anarchy. And I think we need to commend him for having been steadfast and actually accepting against very heavy odds to go into a coalition government.
But why now? Kibaki. Just before an election? Why didn't he tell us this 2 years ago? 4 years ago, for example? We
have been operating a very delicate political fabric within the coalition government. And by virtue of where he sits as a co-principal in this government, there are certain things that you did not want to say in the midstream, so that you cause again disequilibrium in government.
All right, fine. There's an interesting tweet here, and it comes from Omondi. Kevin, thank you for sharing your thoughts. He says, does the PM share responsibility with President Kibaki on the state of insecurity, and what is he going to do about it? Like you said, for the good things, for infrastructure and everything, they share that. Does Raila Odinga now carry that burden as well of the lack of security in this country, of what happened in Tana? Because we haven't seen the Prime Minister go to Tana, for example. We've only been complaining about the President not doing so, but we haven't seen the Prime Minister go to Tana. We didn't see him in Baragoi. We haven't seen him in Isli, where we've had blasts for quite a while. What is his take, and does he share responsibility for everything that went wrong within the coalition government, including insecurity?
I think, Yvonne, our memories are not serving us right. You remember Raila came from outside a trip, an overseas trip, and his next stop was Isli, in the wake of those bombings. That is actually servant leadership by example. Then two, again, it takes me back to what I've said again and again during this interview.
That it was a difficult time. We've heard that, Eliud. You've said that so many times. However, despite the fact that it's a difficult time, Raila Odinga is willing to take the praise for infrastructure and take the praise, saying, fine, this was done before him, and the good things. But can we have you on record as saying the Prime Minister will take responsibility for some of the failings of the government?
You see, the security apparatus, the reality on the ground is that the security apparatus in this country have largely been in the hands of the PNU side.
That is right. However, even other ministries like the Treasury were also under PNU. However, with infrastructure, which required a lot of disbursement from the Treasury, I'd just like to know if he takes half the responsibility, because if he's going to take 50% of the praise for everything that's happened right, whether it happened from PNU or ODM or in collaboration, is he willing to take responsibility for the ills of the current government?
Yes and no. He would take responsibility on the basis of the fact that there have been co-principals in the government, okay? But when you look at the practical situation on the ground, I think we will not be fair to Raila if, for example, we apportion the blame as far as some of the insecurity mishaps we have had in this country to his doorstep.
So what are you saying? That he would take none of the blame whatsoever for that?
I believe that as an individual, Raila has tried his best as far as security issues is concerned. But the operational environment has not enabling perhaps to implement some of the promises that the ODM party had in its manifesto.
Okay. Let's go to an area where he had a bit of more influence, because you keep talking about how he was hampered by the coalition government. And let's go to his constituency now, in Langata, housing one of, if not the biggest slum this side of the Sahara. A lot of people are asking, why do we not see changes in the lives of the people that he has led in Parliament for the last, let's even say the last 5 years. Let's not even look beyond that, but let's say 5 years. How have the lives of the persons living in Kibera, living in Langata area, improved as a result of Raila Odinga being their member of Parliament?
Now, I don't think that you can isolate one part of the country, like one constituency, if you are a prime minister, and then only focus on the aspirations of that set of people. We need to look at this in a larger context.
Which is?
The larger context I'm talking about here is, has Raila, for example, contributed towards facilitating economic growth that would lead to a rise in the income per capita of the Kenyan people, not just in Kibera residents, but all Kenyans.
But let's take a look at Kibera, yes, because he is the member of parliament.
Yeah.
Let's put aside the fact that he's a prime minister for just one moment. But as head of the Langata constituency, let's have a few examples of what's happened in Kibera, where he has full control.
One is education. One area where Raila has done very well in Kibera is education. We have got the Raila Educational Center in Kibera. It is a model school through his personal efforts and in partnership with the private sector. Through his facilitation, we have now seen the slum upgrading project, the housing project coming up in Kibera. And if you have been there, most of those shanties that we are witnessing in Kibera today, in a short time, will be a thing of the past. We have got very decent housing projects coming up.
We've got the 4A, I think, that we all know about.
Yes.
Has there been anything after 4A?
Well, but that's an integral stride as far as housing is concerned.
Okay, has there been anything after 4A?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, all right. So since Madari, the 4A project, we've not seen anything else. All right, we've talked about education. Let's talk about water, electricity, security in some of these areas. And not just Kibera, but, you know, Langata constituency is a large area as well. Let's talk about some of the CDF projects that he has been able to oversee.
Well, that really does not lie within my functional domain, and I think I will not be giving this area justice if I started talking about the details of the CDF projects that we have been implementing.
Well, you are his chief campaign manager.
Yes.
So would this not fall within your docket to know, like you talked about his track record? Would his track record not be something that you would be well aware of?
Kibera itself, to me, is a model constituency. Langata is a model constituency as far as development is concerned.
Why is that?
That constituency has witnessed very positive management of the CDF funds. Yeah, there are good governance structures which were put in place to ensure that there is proper implementation and utilization of the CDF funds. I've just mentioned some of the integral landmark projects that have taken place in that constituency. Other than the educational and housing initiatives in Kibera, there are a lot of positive initiatives there. We have got community policing project in Kibera. That is a fundamental stride as far as enhancing security is concerned, where we have the public partnership partnering with the police to enhance security. We have got integral strides in health. Quite a number of projects have come up as far as health is concerned through the utilization of CDF funds.
Okay, all right. We've talked about his track record, and in closing, Eliud, he hasn't had a very easy time in government, as you've mentioned, because of the extraordinary circumstances that we came to, that you have constantly mentioned. Will this hamper the vote as we go forward?
I don't think so. I don't think that this will hamper the vote as we move forward. Based on his scorecard, not just while serving in government, but also while operating within the political atmosphere since the 80s, Kenyans will judge Raila on the basis of who he is. And I would say that largely Raila represents the wishes and aspirations of the common Kenyan.
Okay, all right.
Then two, we are actually now presenting a team. It is not just Raila. The court government will not just be about Raila. We are talking about Raila, we are talking about Kalonzo Musyoka. So we are putting together the aggressiveness and pursuit of results for Raila, the diplomacy, stability of judgment of Kalonzo Musyoka, and you combine that with the gentleman Mien and of Moses Wetangula and other integral players who are in the background, then I can assure you that we are putting before Kenyans a very palatable political menu. Okay,
all right. Before I let you go, I have to ask you about the Jubilee Alliance, which you mentioned. In your opinion, of course, there's a lot of people that would be offended by that, other candidates in the race, but you mentioned Jubilee as your most formidable competition. Let's talk about them for a minute. The two are facing charges at the ICC. They have accused Raila and the court team of using that to their advantage. Sitting here now, speaking on behalf of Raila, we would like to believe, do you believe they should not be in this race because of the charges at the ICC?
We want all Kenyans to be in this race. And even talking about the issue of ICC, the position of Raila, since this ICC issue came into being, was that we needed a local mechanism through which this issue could be sorted out. But it is the same people who are now facing charges.
But does it
at
work
the
to
ICC.
Raila's advantage?
Yeah.
Of course it would, wouldn't it? The charges they're facing at the ICC, is it something then that is used during the campaign strategy?
It is not, to us,
let's talk about it.
It's not a campaign issue. It is the other side that is making it a campaign issue, that it is Raila who pushed for us to go to the ICC, to be taken to the ICC, which is not the case. And in fact, CORD as a coalition, and by extension Raila, have categorically stated that once they form the government in March next year, one of the fundamental issues that they will immediately address is to engage all the integral stakeholders as far as this ICC is concerned, so that this process is reverted back to Kenya.
Okay, all right. So,
so to us, it is not a campaign issue.
It is not a campaign issue.
It's not a campaign issue.
So is it something then that we would not see them mentioned during the campaigns at all as we go to March 4th?
We have not been talking about it, really. We've not been talking about it. Actually, moving forward, we want to see an issue-based campaign, not a personalized campaign. So we don't really want to see a situation where we are seen to be taking advantage of the misfortunes of any part of the political establishment to our advantage. They are Kenyans. They are our brothers.
Okay.
So we really don't want to happen that. We want to focus on our campaign without name calling. We want to drive an issue-based campaign. And we are actually challenging the opposite side to also adapt the same approach.
Eliud, if you can do this for me in 1 minute, what would we see in 1 year of Raila's administration should he win in March?
Jobs, jobs, and jobs. More jobs for the youth.
Okay, we will hold you to that.
Infrastructure. And 3, security.
All right, okay. Jobs, infrastructure, and security. Eliud Owalo, thank you so much for coming in, and thank you for your comments. We will continue to share them, and I will be reading them to you at the end of this interview. We have been speaking with Eliud Owalo, who's the Chief Campaign Manager and head of the Raila Odinga Presidential Campaign Secretariat, analyzing Raila Odinga's plans for the country should he win, together with his running mate, that is Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka. Thank you for your time. It's now 5 minutes to 8 o'clock. We want to take another short commercial break. We will be right back. We'll be talking about women in politics and just what value they would add. Keep it Sunrise Live.